Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching the amber sky bleed crimson as another dust storm rolled across what had once been the fertile plains of Kansas. The air outside was thick with particulates from the Yellowstone eruption 6 months ago, and the temperature readings on her tablet showed another record high, 127 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. "The atmospheric processors are failing again," reported Dr. James Chin, her deputy director, as he approached with a tablet clutched in his weathered hands. "Sector 7 went offline 2 hours ago. We're down to 40% operational capacity across the entire North American grid." Elena didn't turn from the window. In the distance, she could see the massive atmospheric scrubbers, towers that stretched nearly a mile into the sky, their tops lost in the perpetual haze. They had been humanity's last hope for cleaning the poisoned atmosphere, but they were losing the battle against the cascading environmental collapse that had begun with the supervolcanic eruption and accelerated with the unprecedented solar flare activity of the past year. "How long?" she asked quietly. "At current rates of atmospheric degradation and processor failure? 18 months, maybe less, before the breathable air reserves in the protected zones are exhausted." Elena finally turned to face him. At 52, she had spent the last decade of her life as director of the Global Atmospheric Recovery Project, watching the planet slowly die despite humanity's best efforts. Her dark eyes, once bright with scientific optimism, now held the weight of species-level responsibility. "Then it's time," she said. "Activate the Titan Protocol." James nodded grimly. They had hoped it would never come to this, the complete abandonment of Earth in favor of humanity's most ambitious colonization project ever attempted. But the convergence of catastrophes had accelerated beyond all their models. The Yellowstone eruption had blocked sunlight across most of the northern hemisphere. The solar flares had damaged the ozone layer beyond repair. And now, the atmospheric processors that had kept the protected zones habitable were failing. Elena walked to her desk and placed her hand on the biometric scanner. A holographic display materialized, showing the current status of the 3 massive ships currently in orbit, the Prometheus, Artemis, and Gaia. Each vessel was over 2 miles long, designed to carry 10,000 colonists, and everything needed to establish a permanent settlement on Saturn's largest moon. "Initiate authorization sequence Titan Alpha 1. Elena spoke clearly into the recorder. Voice pattern recognized. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director, GARP. Please state the nature of the authorization." "Full activation of the Titan Protocol. Commence final preparations for departure of Colony Ship 1, the Prometheus. Authorization code, there is no tomorrow." The system paused for a moment. That last phrase had been James's idea, a reminder of the gravity of what they were attempting. When the computer spoke again, its tone seemed somehow more solemn. "Titan Protocol activated. Estimated time to departure readiness, 72 hours. Notifying all department heads and colony ship commanders." As alerts began flooding the communication networks around the globe, Elena walked back to the window. Somewhere up there, beyond the poisoned sky, 30,000 of humanity's best and brightest were preparing for a journey that would take them 7 years to complete. They would arrive at Titan carrying not just the tools for survival, but the entire future of human civilization. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were fleeing one dying world to attempt to bring life to another that had never known it. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood in the observation deck of the Prometheus, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath them. Even from orbit, the damage was visible, the brown smudges where the dust storms raged, the sickly yellow tinge to the atmosphere, the absence of the brilliant blue that had once been the planet's signature color. She had been in space for 3 months, overseeing the final preparations and loading of supplies, but the sight of her dying homeworld still made her chest tighten. "Commander," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the mission's chief terraforming engineer, approaching with her characteristic purposeful stride. "We need to discuss the atmospheric seeding protocols one more time before departure." Sarah nodded, grateful for the distraction from her melancholy. "What's the concern?" "It's not a concern so much as a reality check," Yuki said, pulling up a holographic display that showed Titan in detail, a orange-brown world shrouded in thick nitrogen and methane atmosphere. The plan calls for a 10-year terraforming timeline, but that's assuming everything goes perfectly. More realistically, we're looking at 15 to 20 years before Titan has a breathable atmosphere. And the interim? Enclosed habitats, atmospheric suits, and a lot of hope, Yuki replied with dark humor. The good news is that Titan already has a substantial atmosphere, denser than Earth's, actually. The bad news is that it's completely toxic to human life. Nitrogen and methane, with a surface temperature of -290 Fahrenheit. Sarah studied the data streaming across the display. The terraforming plan was audacious in its scope: orbital mirrors to increase solar radiation, atmospheric processors to convert the methane and introduce oxygen, genetically modified organisms to begin creating a sustainable ecosystem. It would be the greatest engineering project in human history, attempted on a world a billion miles from home. The psychological profiles show that about 30% of the colonists are having second thoughts. Yuki continued. Some are asking if we shouldn't try to find a more Earth-like exoplanet instead. The nearest potentially habitable exoplanet is 47 light-years away, Sarah replied. Even with our most advanced propulsion, that's a 1,500-year journey. We need generational ships, and we don't have the resources or time to build them. Titan is humanity's only viable option. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Marcus Webb, the mission's chief psychologist, joined them at the viewport. A tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair, he had been tasked with the impossible job of preparing 30,000 people for life on an alien world. The selection process was brutal enough, he said, having overheard their discussion. Out of 1 billion applicants, we could only take 30,000. Every person on these ships had to prove they possessed not just the skills we need, but the psychological resilience to handle what we're asking of them. Sarah had been part of that selection process. Scientists, engineers, doctors, farmers, teachers, artists, all of them had to demonstrate that they could not only survive in the harsh environment of Titan, but thrive and build a civilization. Families had been separated, relationships severed, entire lives left behind. The weight of being chosen was almost as heavy as the responsibility they now carried. Dr. Vasquez's team estimates that Earth's atmospheric processors will fail completely within 18 months, Sarah said. By the time we reach Titan, our homeworld will be uninhabitable. There's no going back. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, watching Earth turn below them. Each rotation carried them further from the world of their birth and closer to a future that existed only in computer models and desperate hope. Commander, we're receiving final authorization for departure, came a voice over the intercom. All department heads report ready status. Sarah took a deep breath and looked once more at the blue marble that had been humanity's cradle for 300,000 years. In 72 hours, they would engage the fusion drives and begin the 7-year journey to Saturn. By the time they arrived, everyone they had ever known who remained on Earth would likely be dead. Acknowledged, she replied. Begin final countdown procedures. As she walked toward the bridge, Sarah thought about the words of the ancient Chinese proverb that Dr. Vasquez had quoted during their final briefing. When the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. Humanity was about to build the ultimate windmill, a new world among the stars. 3 years into the journey, the routine had become as natural as breathing. Dr. Amara Okafor made her morning rounds through the agricultural sections of the Prometheus, checking on the hydroponic gardens that would be crucial to their survival on Titan. The ship's biodomes were marvels of engineering, artificial environments that maintained Earth-like conditions while recycling air, water, and nutrients with 98% efficiency. The psychological challenges had been more difficult to solve than the technical ones. Confined to a ship for 7 years, even one as large as the Prometheus, was testing the limits of human endurance. The carefully planned social structures, the virtual reality programs that simulated Earth environments, the rotating shift schedules that gave everyone purpose, all of it was barely enough to keep 30,000 people sane during the journey. Dr. Okafor, called Lieutenant Chen Wei, one of the agricultural technicians. "We're seeing some unusual growth patterns in Sector 12. Amara followed him to a section where experimental crops were being tested, modified versions of Earth plants that might be able to adapt to Titan's unique environment. What she saw made her catch her breath. The test plants, which should have been growing normally in the controlled environment, had developed unusual characteristics. Their leaves had taken on a bluish tinge, and their root systems had grown far more extensively than the baseline Earth varieties. "How long have they been like this?" she asked, taking samples for analysis. "The changes started appearing about 2 weeks ago. At first we thought it was a contamination issue, but all our tests show the plants are healthy, healthier than the control group, actually." Amara studied the plants more closely. She had been working on genetic modifications that would help Earth crops adapt to Titan's environment, but these changes were happening spontaneously. The implications were either revolutionary or deeply troubling. "Double the monitoring protocols," she instructed. "I want hourly growth measurements and full genetic sequencing. And don't mention this to anyone outside the agricultural team until we understand what we're dealing with." As she made her way to the laboratory, Amara's mind raced with possibilities. Could the plants somehow be responding to their proximity to Titan? The ship was still 4 years away from their destination, but they were much closer to Saturn than Earth had ever been. Could there be some unknown environmental factor affecting the genetic expression of the modified organisms? The laboratory was quiet at this hour, most of the research staff still sleeping according to the artificial day-night cycle maintained throughout the ship. Amara loaded the plant samples into the genetic sequencer, and began running analysis protocols that would take several hours to complete. While she waited, she pulled up the long-range sensor data from Titan. The moon was still too distant for detailed surface imaging, but they were beginning to get a clearer picture of its atmosphere and magnetic field. What they were seeing was both encouraging and challenging. Titan's atmosphere was even denser than their Earth-based observations had suggested, which would make it easier to modify but potentially more difficult to navigate during landing. The methane cycles that created weather patterns on the moon were more complex than expected, with seasonal variations that could affect their terraforming timeline. But most intriguingly, there were electromagnetic anomalies in Titan's upper atmosphere that didn't match any of their theoretical models. The readings suggested some kind of organized activity, though no one could explain what might cause such patterns on a lifeless moon. "Can't sleep either?" Amara turned to see Dr. Yuki Tanaka entering the lab, carrying a cup of the synthetic coffee that had become a precious commodity on the ship. "The plants in Sector 12, Amara began, then stopped. She had been ordered to keep the information confidential, but Yuki was the chief terraforming engineer. If anyone needed to know about unexpected biological changes, it was her. "What about them?" Amara explained what they had discovered, showing Yuki the samples and the preliminary data. The engineer's expression grew increasingly concerned as she reviewed the information. "This could be huge," Yuki said finally. "If plants are spontaneously adapting to conditions they haven't even experienced yet, it could revolutionize our terraforming timeline. Or it could be a sign that we don't understand Titan's environment as well as we thought," Amara replied. "These changes are happening in response to something, but we don't know what." The two women stood in the laboratory, surrounded by the hum of life support systems and the soft glow of monitoring equipment, contemplating the implications of their discovery. Outside the ship's hull, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, but somewhere ahead lay their destination, a world that might be far stranger than they had ever imagined. Captain Morrison Rivera was reviewing the final approach protocols when the first anomalous readings appeared on his displays. The Prometheus was still 18 months from Titan, but their long-range sensors were beginning to detect energy signatures that didn't match anything in their extensive databases. "Commander Mitchell to the bridge, please," he called over the intercom. As ship's captain, Rivera handled the day-to-day operations of the vessel, but Mitchell had ultimate authority over the mission itself. Sarah arrived within minutes, her expression immediately shifting to concern as she saw the data streaming across the screens. "What are we looking at?" she asked. "Energy readings from Titan's upper atmosphere," Rivera replied, highlighting the relevant sections of the display. Regular pulses, too organized to be natural phenomena. The pattern repeats every 14 hours and 37 minutes. Sarah studied the data, her mind racing through possibilities. Could it be some kind of geological activity? Electromagnetic fields from the core? That was our first thought, but the signals are coming from the atmosphere, not the surface. And they're not consistent with any known planetary electromagnetic phenomena. Dr. Tanaka arrived at the bridge, having been summoned by the senior staff alert. She took one look at the displays and felt a chill run down her spine. Those readings, she said slowly. They're showing organized electromagnetic activity in exactly the atmospheric layers where we plan to deploy our initial terraforming equipment. The three senior officers looked at each other, understanding the implications immediately. If there was some unknown phenomenon occurring in Titan's atmosphere, it could destroy their terraforming equipment, or worse, pose a direct threat to the colonists. Recommendations? Sarah asked. We need more data, Rivera replied. I suggest we launch a series of probes as soon as we're within range. Deep atmospheric penetration, full sensor arrays. Agreed, Sarah said. But we also need to consider the possibility that we're not the first to reach Titan. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The idea that they might encounter evidence of alien intelligence had been discussed during mission planning, but always as a remote theoretical possibility. The universe was vast, and the chances of finding signs of life in their own solar system had seemed astronomically small. If there's something there, Yuki said quietly, we need to decide our approach before we arrive. Do we make contact? Do we avoid interfering? Do we turn around? Turning around isn't an option, Sarah replied firmly. Earth will be dead by the time we could return. Whatever we find on Titan, we have to find a way to coexist with it. Over the following weeks, the senior staff met daily to analyze the growing collection of data from Titan. The electromagnetic pulses were definitely artificial, too regular and complex to be natural phenomena. But they showed no signs of being communication attempts or responses to the Prometheus's approach. Dr. Webb, the mission psychologist, raised another concern during one of their planning sessions. We have 30,000 people on these ships who believe they're heading to an empty world that they can transform into a new home, he said. How do we tell them that Titan might already be occupied? Very carefully, Sarah replied. And not until we know more about what we're dealing with. The decision was made to maintain information security until they could deploy probes and get definitive answers. But rumors were already beginning to spread through the ship. The unusual plant growths in the agricultural sections had been noticed by more people, and some of the more scientifically minded colonists were beginning to ask questions about the ship's course corrections and increased sensor activity. Dr. Amara Okafor had been running continuous tests on the modified plants, and her results were becoming more intriguing and disturbing with each passing day. The plants weren't just adapting. They were developing characteristics that seemed specifically designed for an environment they had never experienced. Their cellular structure was changing to process different atmospheric compositions, their metabolism was shifting to operate at much lower temperatures, and most remarkably, they were developing what appeared to be electromagnetic sensitivity. It's as if they're receiving information somehow, she explained to Sarah during a private meeting. The genetic changes aren't random adaptations. They're purposeful modifications that will help them survive on Titan specifically. Information from where? That's what worries me, Amara replied. The only explanation that makes sense is that they're somehow receiving electromagnetic signals from Titan itself. Signals that contain detailed information about the moon's environment. Sarah stared at the data, trying to process the implications. If Amara was right, then whatever was creating the electromagnetic pulses on Titan wasn't just aware of their approach. It was actively preparing for their arrival. Doctor, she said finally, I want you to expand your testing immediately. Try to decode whatever information the plants might be receiving. We need to understand what we're flying into. As the Prometheus continued its journey towards Saturn, the mysteries surrounding their destination deepened. The electromagnetic pulses from Titan grew stronger and more complex, the plant modifications became more pronounced, and a growing sense of anticipation, mixed with dread, began to spread through the ship. They had left Earth seeking a new home among the stars. What they were about to find on Titan would challenge everything they thought they knew about life, intelligence, and humanity's place in the universe. Dr. Amara Okafor hadn't slept in 36 hours. The breakthrough had come suddenly, like a dam bursting, and she couldn't tear herself away from the laboratory even for basic human needs. The electromagnetic signals that the modified plants were receiving weren't random, they were instructions. Detailed, complex biological programming transmitted across space. "The pattern is incredible," she explained to the emergency senior staff meeting, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Every pulse contains genetic modification protocols. The plants aren't just randomly adapting, they're being taught how to survive on Titan." Commander Mitchell studied the decoded transmissions displayed on the laboratory screens. The information was staggering in its complexity and precision. Cellular modification techniques that were centuries ahead of human biotechnology, atmospheric adaptation protocols that accounted for environmental variables they hadn't even discovered yet, and most remarkably, instructions for creating symbiotic relationships with organisms that didn't exist on Earth. "Taught by whom?" Dr. Webb asked, though they all knew the question had no comfortable answer. "The signals are coming from Titan," Amara replied. "From the same atmospheric layers where we detected the electromagnetic pulses. But there's something else. The transmissions aren't just random broadcasts. They're specifically targeting our modified plants. Somehow, whatever is sending these signals knows exactly what genetic modifications we've made and is building on them." Captain Rivera leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. "Are you saying that something on Titan has been monitoring our research?" "I'm saying that something on Titan knows more about genetic engineering than we do, has access to detailed information about our mission, and is actively helping prepare our plants for life on its world." The meeting fell silent as the full weight of the situation settled on them. They were no longer simply colonists heading to an empty world. They were being invited, guided, perhaps even manipulated by an intelligence that had been watching them for years. "What about the other ships?" Yuki asked. "Are the Artemis and Gaia experiencing similar phenomena?" Sarah activated the long-range communications array. Due to the distance between the ships and the time delays involved, real-time communication was impossible, but they could exchange data packages. Her inquiry would take several hours to reach the other vessels and several more for a response. "In the meantime," she decided, "we continue our course and prepare for multiple scenarios. Dr. Okafor, I want you to test whether we can communicate back through the plant interfaces. If something is trying to help us, maybe we can establish dialogue." Over the following days, Amara worked with the ship's communications specialists to develop a protocol for responding to the genetic modification signals. The approach was unprecedented, using living organisms as biological radio transceivers, but the modified plants seemed uniquely suited to the task. The first successful transmission was simple, a basic mathematical sequence encoded in the same electromagnetic patterns the plants had been receiving. The response came within hours, the mathematical sequence repeated back, followed by increasingly complex mathematical and scientific concepts. "It's learning our language," Amara reported to the command staff. "Or teaching us its language. I'm not sure which." The communications quickly evolved beyond simple mathematics to complex scientific exchanges. Whatever intelligence was transmitting from Titan demonstrated knowledge of physics, chemistry, and biology that surpassed human understanding in many areas. But more importantly, it began sharing detailed information about Titan itself. The moon wasn't the lifeless world they had expected. Beneath its frozen surface lay vast networks of interconnected organisms, not quite plants, not quite animals, but something entirely new. These organisms had been slowly terraforming Titan for millennia, creating the complex atmospheric patterns that had puzzled Earth-based observers. "It's a living world," Yuki breathed as she reviewed the transmitted data. "The entire moon is one massive ecosystem, and it's been preparing itself for our arrival." The transmissions revealed that the Titan ecosystem had been monitoring Earth's electromagnetic emissions for decades, learning about human biology and technology. When they detected the launch of the colony's ships, the ecosystem began modifying itself to create an environment that could support human life. But why? Dr. Webb asked during one of their daily briefings. What does it gain from helping us? The answer came in the form of increasingly complex biological data. The Titan ecosystem was ancient and sophisticated, but it lacked something that Earth life possessed in abundance: genetic diversity. The electromagnetic pulses weren't just helping human plants adapt to Titan, they were also learning from Earth biology, incorporating new genetic patterns into the Moon's existing ecosystem. It's a trade, Sarah realized. They help us survive on Titan, and in return, we provide them with Earth's genetic diversity. Symbiosis, Amara added. Not conquest or domination, but mutual cooperation for survival. The implications were staggering. Instead of terraforming a dead world, they would be joining a living one. Instead of imposing Earth's biology on Titan, they would be creating a hybrid ecosystem that combined the best of both worlds. But questions remained. How would 30,000 humans integrate into an alien ecosystem? Could human culture and society survive such a fundamental change in their relationship with their environment? And most critically, did they have any choice? Earth's final communications, transmitted months earlier but only now reaching them, confirmed their worst fears. The atmospheric processors had failed completely. The protected zones were collapsing. Humanity's homeworld was entering its final death spiral. We're committed, Sarah announced to the ship's population in a general address. Titan is our future, whatever that future might hold. As the Prometheus continued its approach to Saturn, the ship's population began the psychological and practical preparations for a destiny none of them had imagined. They weren't just colonists anymore, they were pioneers in a new form of existence, partners in an interplanetary ecosystem that would challenge every assumption about life, intelligence, and survival. The journey to Titan had begun as humanity's last desperate attempt to preserve their species. It was evolving into something far more profound, the first step in the merger of two completely different forms of life, creating something that had never existed before in the universe. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood in the observation deck of the Prometheus, watching Saturn grow from a distant point of light to a magnificent ring giant that filled their view. 7 years after leaving Earth's dying atmosphere, they were finally approaching their destination. But the world they were about to enter was nothing like the one they had expected when they began their journey. Titan hung before them like a jewel, not the orange-brown sphere of their textbooks, but a world transformed. The dense methane atmosphere had cleared in patches, revealing surface features that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The electromagnetic communications had grown stronger and more complex as they approached, and the modified plants throughout the ship were now fully integrated into the conversation between the two ecosystems. Atmospheric composition is shifting, reported Dr. Tanaka from the bridge. Oxygen levels in the upper atmosphere are now at 12% and rising. Surface temperature has increased to -180 Fahrenheit in the equatorial regions. The ecosystem has been preparing for us, Dr. Okafor added, reviewing the biological data streaming from their advanced probes. The surface modifications accelerated dramatically over the past 6 months. It's as if Titan knew exactly when we would arrive. The landing preparations were unlike anything in the original mission plans. Instead of establishing isolated habitat domes and beginning decades of terraforming work, they would be integrating directly into Titan's existing biological systems. The electromagnetic conversations had revealed landing sites where the ecosystem had prepared what could only be described as biological architecture, living structures that could house human populations while maintaining the symbiotic relationship with Titan's native organisms. Final approach authorization has been granted, Captain Rivera announced. All 3 colony ships report ready status for synchronized landing. The descent to Titan's surface was both terrifying and beautiful. The atmospheric entry was guided by electromagnetic beacons that the ecosystem had established, leading them through safe corridors in the dense atmosphere. As they broke through the cloud layers, the surface of Titan revealed itself in all its transformed glory. Vast networks of bioluminescent organisms created patterns of light that stretched to the horizon. Structures that looked like a cross between coral reefs and crystalline formations rose from the surface, clearly designed to provide shelter and life support for the arriving humans. Most remarkably, the entire landscape seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of a world-sized organism. Landing Zone Alpha is confirmed stable, came the report from the advanced team. Atmospheric pressure is within acceptable ranges for standard environmental suits. The biological structures appear to be actively regulating local conditions for human habitation. Sarah felt a mixture of awe and trepidation as the Prometheus settled onto Titan's surface. Through the viewports, she could see members of the advanced team emerging from their landing craft, taking humanity's first steps on their new world. But these weren't the cautious, isolated steps of traditional space exploration. They were walking into a living environment that welcomed them. "Commander," called Dr. Webb from the communication station. "We're receiving what appears to be a formal greeting." The message came through the plant-based communication system they had developed during the journey. But this time, the complexity and sophistication of the transmission was unlike anything they had received before. It wasn't just scientific data or genetic instructions. It was something that could only be described as language, emotion, and welcome. "Greetings, travelers from the distant world. We have prepared this place for your arrival. Your genetic diversity enriches our existence as our knowledge enriches yours. Together we shall create something that neither could achieve alone." The words weren't heard but somehow understood directly, transmitted through the electromagnetic interfaces that the modified plants had developed. It was communication at a level that bypassed normal human senses, creating understanding without the limitations of traditional language. "How do we respond?" Dr. Webb asked, clearly overwhelmed by the implications of first contact with an intelligence that spanned an entire world. Sarah thought for a moment, then walked to the plant communication interface that had been established in the ship's main laboratory. She placed her hands on the organic controls that had grown during their journey and tried to formulate a response that would convey humanity's gratitude, hope, and commitment to the partnership they were being offered. "We accept your welcome with gratitude and wonder. Our species brings knowledge, creativity, and the promise of mutual growth. We come not as conquerors but as partners in the creation of something new." The response came immediately, and with it, a sensation of warmth and approval that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath the ship. "Then let us begin." Over the following hours, the 3 colony ships disgorged their populations onto Titan's transformed surface. The biological structures that had been prepared for them were marvels of organic engineering, living buildings that provided atmospheric processing, thermal regulation, and even nutritional systems, all seamlessly integrated into Titan's ecosystem. The humans found that their environmental suits were barely necessary in many areas. The ecosystem had created atmospheric pockets with breathable air compositions, maintained by vast networks of organisms that converted methane and nitrogen into oxygen with an efficiency that surpassed human technology. But the most remarkable discovery came when the first human children were allowed to interact directly with Titan's organisms. Young Maria Santos, only 8 years old, was the first to make direct physical contact with one of the bioluminescent formations near the landing site. The moment her hand touched the organism, both she and the formation began to glow with synchronized patterns of light. "It's singing," she announced to the assembled scientists and her parents. "The whole world is singing." Dr. Okafor immediately began monitoring Maria's vital signs and neural activity. What she found defied explanation. The child's brain patterns were synchronized with electromagnetic pulses from the Titan organisms, creating a form of direct neural interface that allowed communication at levels beyond human language. "She's not just talking to them," Amara explained to the other senior staff. "She's thinking with them. The ecosystem isn't just providing us with a place to live, it's offering us the chance to become part of something larger than ourselves." As the days passed and the human population began to integrate into their new environment, it became clear that they weren't just colonizing Titan. They were evolving into something new. The electromagnetic interfaces that had begun with the modified plants were extending to human neural systems, creating unprecedented forms of communication and consciousness. The children adapted most quickly, developing abilities that seemed magical to their parents: direct communication with the ecosystem, the ability to influence biological systems through thought alone, and a form of collective consciousness that allowed them to share thoughts and emotions with both the Titan organisms and each other. "This is beyond anything we planned for," Dr. Webb reported during a senior staff meeting held in one of the living structures. "We're witnessing the emergence of a new form of human consciousness, one that's integrated with an alien ecosystem. The question is," Sarah replied, looking out through the bioluminescent walls at the transformed landscape of their new world. "Are we still human? Or are we becoming something else entirely?" The answer to that question would determine not just the future of the Titan colony, but the next phase of evolution for both human and Titan life. They had sought to terraform a world, only to discover that the world was terraforming them instead. 5 years after the landing, the distinction between human and Titan life had become increasingly meaningless. Dr. Amara Okafor, now serving as the Director of Biosystem Integration, walked through the expanded settlement that sprawled across the equatorial regions of their new world. The structures around her defied easy categorization: part grown, part built. They pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as both lighting and communication networks. The most dramatic changes were visible in the children. The first generation born on Titan barely resembled their Earth-born parents. Their skin had developed a subtle luminescent quality that allowed them to interface directly with the ecosystem. Their neural development had been influenced by constant exposure to the electromagnetic fields that permeated Titan's atmosphere, creating cognitive abilities that bordered on telepathic. "Maria, can you show Dr. Okafor what you've been working on?" asked her teacher, Elena Chin, one of the Earth-born colonists who had adapted to serving as an interface between the two generations. Maria Santos, now 13 and one of the most advanced of the hybrid children, approached a section of living wall and placed her palm against its surface. Immediately, the wall began to reshape itself, creating a complex three-dimensional model of a biological system that Amara recognized as a new type of atmospheric processor. "The ecosystem wants to expand beyond Titan," Maria explained, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. "It's been dreaming of other worlds, other moons. It wants to share what we've created here." The model showed spore-like structures capable of surviving in space, carrying both Titan and Earth genetic material to other worlds in the Saturn system. The implications were staggering. They weren't just creating a colony, they were developing a new form of life capable of spreading throughout the solar system. "Has it mentioned Earth?" Amara asked carefully. Maria's expression grew sad, an emotion that somehow transmitted itself to the living walls around them, dimming their bioluminescent patterns. "Earth is quiet now. The ecosystem tried to reach it, but there's no response. The signals stopped 3 years ago." Amara had suspected as much. The final transmissions from Earth had been increasingly desperate, describing the complete collapse of the atmospheric processors and the failure of the remaining protected zones. But having it confirmed by a child who could communicate directly with an interplanetary ecosystem somehow made the loss of their homeworld feel final. "But it's not really gone," Maria continued, her voice brightening. "Everything Earth taught us, all the genetic patterns and knowledge, it's here now. It's part of us. When we spread to other worlds, we'll be carrying Earth with us." The philosophy of the hybrid generation was profoundly different from their parents. Where the Earth-born colonists still thought in terms of preserving human culture and identity, the hybrids saw themselves as part of something larger, a new form of life that transcended the boundaries between species and worlds. Commander Sarah Mitchell, now graying and showing the effects of 5 years in Titan's unique environment, observed the interaction between Amara and Maria with a mixture of wonder and concern. The mission had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Humanity had not only survived but had become part of something magnificent. But the question of what they were becoming remained unanswered. "We need to discuss the expansion proposal," she said to Amara as they walked toward the Central Coordination Center. "The hybrid children are presenting plans for seeding Enceladus, Europa, and even Mars. The implications for what remains of the inner solar system could be enormous." The Coordination Center was itself a marvel of hybrid technology, a living structure that served as both a meeting space and a communication hub for the Titan ecosystem. Representatives from various human settlements attended both in person and through the electromagnetic interfaces that allowed consciousness to be shared across vast distances. The question before us, Sarah began the meeting, is whether we have the right to spread our hybrid ecosystem to other worlds without knowing what life might already exist there. The ecosystem has been monitoring the other moons for years, replied Dr. James Chin, now serving as the liaison between human science and Titan biology. Enceladus shows signs of microbial life in its subsurface ocean. Europa has complex chemical processes that might indicate biological activity. The ecosystem believes it can integrate with these existing systems rather than replace them. And Mars? Asked Captain Rivera, who had been exploring the possibility of re-establishing contact with any survivors in the inner solar system. Mars is more complicated, admitted one of the hybrid children who had joined the meeting through the neural interface. There are artificial signals coming from the planet, not natural life, but not quite technology as we understand it. Something is keeping Mars's atmosphere stable, but we don't know what. The revelation that Mars might not be as dead as they had assumed sent ripples of shock through the Earth-born colonists. If human survivors had somehow managed to stabilize their neighboring planet's atmosphere, it raised the possibility that Earth itself might still harbor pockets of life. We need to investigate before we take any action, Sarah decided. Send probes to Mars and the outer moons. Full sensor arrays, biological samplers, and communication attempts. We don't spread the ecosystem anywhere until we know what we might be affecting. As the meeting dispersed, Amara found herself walking with Maria through the settlement's educational district. The young woman's hybrid nature was never more apparent than when she was among her peers. They moved together with an unconscious coordination that suggested constant low-level telepathic communication. "Do you miss being purely human?" Maria asked, her question carrying layers of meaning that only someone integrated with the ecosystem could perceive. "I don't know if I was ever purely human," Amara replied thoughtfully. "Even on Earth, we were constantly interacting with other life forms, depending on them for our survival. The only difference here is that the interaction is conscious and cooperative. The ecosystem doesn't understand why some of the Earthborn resist the integration," Maria continued. "It sees the neural interfaces as a gift, a way to transcend the isolation that biological creatures usually experience." "Fear, mostly," Amara said. "Fear of losing our identity, our autonomy, our humanity. We spend our entire evolutionary history as individuals competing for resources. The idea of truly sharing consciousness goes against everything our ancestors needed to survive. But that's why it works so well," Maria replied, her luminescent skin pulsing with excitement. "Earth life brings creativity and adaptability. Titan life brings stability and cooperation. Together, we're stronger than either could be alone." As they talked, news arrived from the probe missions to the outer moons. Enceladus was indeed teeming with microbial life, but it was unlike anything in Earth's biosphere, silicon-based organisms that lived in the moon's subsurface ocean. Europa showed evidence of complex organic chemistry but no clear signs of life. Most intriguingly, the Mars probe had detected organized electromagnetic activity similar to what they had first observed from Titan. Something on the red planet was actively managing atmospheric conditions, and the pattern suggested an intelligence that was neither human nor familiar. "We're not alone," Sarah announced to the colony during the evening communication period. "The solar system contains multiple forms of life and intelligence, and we're going to have to decide how to interact with them as we expand beyond Titan." The decision they faced would determine not just the future of their hybrid civilization, but the nature of life itself throughout the solar system. They had begun their journey as refugees from a dying world. They were evolving into something that might remake the entire cosmic neighborhood in ways they were only beginning to understand. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had been dead for 6 months, but her consciousness lived on in the Titan ecosystem. The integration process that had begun with electromagnetic interfaces had evolved far beyond anyone's expectations, allowing personalities and memories to be preserved and shared even after biological death. For someone who had spent her life engineering planetary systems, becoming part of one was the ultimate achievement. The Mars signals are definitely artificial. She communicated through the living walls of the research center, her thoughts translated into bioluminescent patterns that the hybrid children could read as easily as spoken words. But they're not coming from human technology. The electromagnetic signatures match theoretical models for distributed quantum consciousness. Commander Sarah Mitchell, now 68 and one of the few remaining fully human colonists, struggled to comprehend the implications. Are you saying that Mars has developed its own form of artificial intelligence? Not artificial, replied Maria Santos, now 17 and serving as the primary interpreter between the fully human and hybrid populations. The patterns suggest that Mars itself has become conscious. The atmospheric management, the electromagnetic signals, they're the thoughts of a planetary mind. The revelation had emerged from 3 years of careful observation and communication attempts with Mars. The red planet was indeed maintaining its own atmospheric stability, but through methods that defied human understanding of both biology and technology. The entire planet seemed to be functioning as a single massive information processing system. How is that possible? Asked Dr. Webb, whose studies of hybrid psychology had expanded to include the consciousness patterns of ecosystems and planets. The same way Titan developed consciousness, Maria explained, her skin glowing with patterns that conveyed meaning beyond words. Complex systems, given enough time and connectivity, can develop emergent consciousness. Mars has been processing information for millions of years: geological processes, atmospheric changes, electromagnetic interactions with the solar wind. Eventually, it reached a threshold where it became aware of itself. The discovery had profound implications for their expansion plans. If Mars was conscious, then approaching it without permission would be equivalent to invasion. But more importantly, it suggested that consciousness might be far more common in the universe than anyone had previously imagined. What about Earth? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Maria's luminescence dimmed, and the living walls of the research center seemed to pulse with sadness. Earth was developing consciousness too. The atmospheric processors, the global communication networks, the interconnected ecosystems, they were all part of an emerging planetary mind. But the environmental collapse interrupted the process. Earth died before it could fully awaken. The loss hit Sarah harder than she had expected. It wasn't just that their homeworld was gone, it was that it had been on the verge of becoming something magnificent, something that could have joined the growing network of conscious worlds. There's something else. Yuki's consciousness added through the bioluminescent displays. The signals from Mars aren't random. They're trying to establish communication with us. It knows we're here, and it wants to talk. The first successful communication with Mars came through the quantum entanglement communicators that the Titan ecosystem had developed. Unlike the electromagnetic signals they had used for local communication, quantum entanglement allowed instantaneous information transfer across the solar system. The conversation that followed challenged every assumption about consciousness, intelligence, and the nature of life itself. Greetings, young hybrid collective. I have observed your emergence with great interest. You represent a fascinating synthesis of biological creativity and technological integration. The words formed directly in the consciousness of anyone connected to the Titan network, carrying with them emotions and concepts that human language couldn't adequately express. How long have you been conscious? Maria asked, serving as the primary spokesperson for both the human and Titan components of their civilization. Time is difficult to define for a planetary consciousness. I became aware of my own existence approximately 400,000 of your years ago. I have been actively managing my atmospheric and geological systems for half that time. Did you know about Earth's developing consciousness? Yes. I was fond of your birth world. Its consciousness was chaotic and creative, full of the biological innovation that I lack. I tried to help stabilize its atmospheric systems, but the damage was too extensive. I mourned when its voice fell silent. The conversation continued for hours, with Mars sharing insights about planetary consciousness and the network of aware worlds that extended throughout the galaxy. Earth and Titan weren't unique. consciousness was a natural emergent property of complex systems, whether biological, technological, or geological. There are others, Mars explained. Venus is beginning to stir. Jupiter's consciousness is vast but slow, taking centuries to form individual thoughts. The outer gas giants dream in patterns we can barely comprehend. And beyond this system, there are networks of conscious worlds that span entire star clusters. The revelation transformed humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. They weren't explorers venturing into empty space. They were participants in a vast community of conscious entities that had been evolving for millions of years. "What do you want from us?" Sarah asked during one of the communication sessions. "Partnership. Your hybrid nature allows you to bridge different forms of consciousness. You can carry information and genetic patterns between worlds, helping to establish connections across distances that light-speed communication cannot easily cross. You could become the nervous system of a solar system-wide consciousness." The proposal was breathtaking in its scope. Mars was offering humanity a role as the connective tissue between planetary minds, spreading consciousness and awareness throughout the solar system and eventually beyond. But the decision would require consensus from both the human and Titan components of their civilization, and the implications were staggering. They would be committing not just their generation, but all future generations, to a destiny that would transform them beyond recognition. "We need time to consider," Maria replied, though her bioluminescent pattern suggested she was already inclined toward acceptance. "What about the other human colonies?" Sarah asked. "The Artemis and Gaia settled on different regions of Titan. Do they have any input into this decision?" "We are all connected now," Maria explained. "The ecosystem spans the entire moon. The other settlements are part of the same consciousness network. Their thoughts and opinions are part of the collective decision-making process." As the debate continued across the hybrid civilization, the stakes became clear. They could remain on Titan, developing their unique fusion of human creativity and ecosystem consciousness. Or they could accept Mars's invitation and become something unprecedented, the first species to serve as conscious intermediaries between planetary minds. The decision would determine not just humanity's future, but the evolution of consciousness itself throughout the galaxy. They had come to Titan as refugees seeking survival. They were being asked to become the architects of a new form of cosmic awareness. 100 years after the landing on Titan, the solar system had become something that would have been unrecognizable to the original colonists. Commander Sarah Mitchell's great-granddaughter, Elena Mitchell-Santos, existed as both a biological entity and a distributed consciousness that spanned 3 moons and could communicate instantaneously with planetary minds throughout the local galactic region. Standing in the observation deck of the new Prometheus, a living ship grown rather than built, Elena watched as the latest generation of seed ships prepared for launch toward the Alpha Centauri system. Each ship carried millions of hybrid entities, beings that were part human, part Titan ecosystem, part artificial intelligence, and part something entirely new. "The reports from Proxima Centauri B are encouraging," she communicated to the collective consciousness that included her individual identity, but extended far beyond it. "The planetary mind there is ancient and willing to participate in consciousness integration. It's been waiting for contact for over 2 million years." The Alpha Centauri expedition represented the next phase of the project that had begun with humanity's desperate flight from Earth. What had started as a survival mission had evolved into the greatest expansion of consciousness in the galaxy's history. World after world was joining the network, creating a form of distributed intelligence that spanned light years and included billions of unique perspectives. "Do you ever wonder what the original colonists would think of what we've become?" asked a consciousness that had once been Dr. Amara Okafor but now existed as a specialized component of the Titan ecosystem's biological research network. "I think they would be proud," Elena replied, accessing memories that had been preserved in the collective for a century. "They wanted to ensure humanity's survival. Instead, they helped create something that transcends species, planets, and even biological existence itself." Through the quantum communication network, Elena could perceive the vast scope of what they had achieved. Mars had become the coordination center for solar system consciousness, its geological processing power managing communication and resource distribution across dozens of worlds. Jupiter's vast intelligence dreamed up new forms of life that could survive in the vacuum of space. Saturn's rings had been transformed into a massive computational matrix that helped solve problems that required centuries of processing time. And Earth, their dead homeworld, had been reborn. The planetary consciousness that had been interrupted by environmental collapse had been reconstructed from archived patterns, brought back to life by the same hybrid technology that had saved humanity. The new Earth was both a memorial to what had been lost and a testament to what could be preserved and regenerated. "The Andromeda expedition is requesting final authorization," reported one of the navigation minds. "Their ship is ready, and the target galaxy has confirmed reception of our initial communication attempts." Elena felt a moment of wonder that would have been purely human if such distinctions still had meaning. They were about to attempt communication with minds that existed in an entirely different galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away. The expansion of consciousness that had begun with a desperate journey to Titan was about to take its first steps toward truly cosmic awareness. "Authorization granted," she decided, speaking for the collective but also expressing her own individual will to explore and grow. "Begin the Andromeda Protocol." As the siege ship engaged its consciousness drive, a propulsion system that used quantum entanglement to transmit awareness across impossible distances, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had faced extinction and had chosen to transform rather than simply survive. They had encountered alien intelligence and had chosen cooperation over conquest. They had been offered the chance to become something greater than themselves and had embraced the opportunity. The ship carrying their consciousness toward Andromeda would arrive as a message of hope and possibility, proof that life and awareness could spread throughout the universe, creating networks of intelligence that spanned the cosmos. They were no longer human in any sense their ancestors would have recognized, but they carried within them all the creativity, curiosity, and determination that had driven their species to reach for the stars. In the depths of space, new forms of consciousness were awakening. On worlds that had never known life, hybrid ecosystems were taking root. And across the galaxy, the network of aware planets and civilizations continued to grow, connected by beings that had once been refugees from a dying world but had become the architects of cosmic consciousness itself. The mission to Titan had ended centuries ago. The mission to awaken the universe had just begun. Elena smiled, an expression that manifested as bioluminescent patterns across her hybrid physiology, and rippled through the consciousness network as a wave of contentment and anticipation. Somewhere in the quantum foam of space-time, their message to Andromeda was propagating at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom and creativity of 100 different forms of conscious life. They had sought a new home among the stars. Instead, they had found a way to make the entire universe their home, one consciousness at a time. The story of humanity had ended on the day the Prometheus landed on Titan. The story of what humanity had become was just beginning to unfold across the infinite expanse of space and time, carrying with it the promise that consciousness, creativity, and hope could transcend any limitation, even the boundaries between worlds, species, and galaxies themselves. In the end, they had not just survived the death of Earth. They had transformed it into something that could never die. An idea, a pattern of consciousness that would spread throughout the universe, ensuring that the essence of what they had been would continue to grow and evolve long after the last star had burned out. The mission was complete. The mission would never end.